The Reverend Billy Graham, also known as America's pastor, was the first religious leader to have a memorial viewing at the U.S. Capitol. He is the only civilian to be honored with such a memorial at the Rotunda. This high respect is typically reserved for war heroes and presidents only. What elevated Reverend Graham to this distinct position? Let's talk to Mr. Tim Schindel. Please join me in welcoming him to the show. Thank you for coming back.
Nice to be here, Molly, and good to see you again.
All right, so tell us, who was Reverend Billy Graham?
Well, Reverend Billy Graham was an American evangelist and went around telling people the good news of Jesus. I think he started his public ministry in the mid-1940s with an organization called Youth for Christ. It was primarily a youth movement. And for decades, preached all around the world to literally billions of people. I was just reading today that in one event, one large televised event, he preached over, they think, to over 2.5 billion people on one night.
Wow.
in one event. So a remarkable man. And I think there's several things that really made him stand out. And sadly, sometimes in the church or leaders fall into difficulty, they fall into scandal, and Mr. Graham was always very, very careful and conducted himself, and to this day his organization conducts itself with a very high level of integrity. So he never had a scandal. His own personal integrity was always very, very high. There was never any hint that there was something inappropriate with someone other than his wife, and so that was a really, really positive thing. And his message was always simple.
Yeah, because I don't know of too many people who would be able to attract that much of attention, right? Wherever he went. I mean, I remember his last visit to Toronto.
1995.
Yes, yeah. And we wanted to go and see him. And we couldn't reach the stadium because people were out on the streets. There were so many people.
Yeah, and it was like that for him wherever he went. And I would say that, certainly that was, there were many people who preached similar messages. So it wasn't the message as much as it was the man and God helping the man and God giving this man this incredible platform and status and stature through which he knew that he could trust him to be faithful to do what God had called him to do.
Yes, and one of the things I noticed about him when the media people or the reporters ever were interviewing him, they would just sit in front of him with so much of reverence and respect, something I've never seen, whenever they're talking to other people. But there was something about him that he commanded that kind of respect.
Yes.
But, and he referred to himself as just a billy goat.
Yes, yeah, exactly. There was no pretense around him. He was just a very ordinary, simple, humble man. And now he did some things that were very creative. So Billy Graham not in his early years, but as times changed, he started on the radio, and then he went to television, and those were very innovative, creative things. And then he started making, when I was a child, if Billy Graham made a movie, that meant we could go to the theater and watch it, and that was a big deal in my house. And so then there'd be these stories, and inevitably there was a difficulty or pain or hardship, and people heard Billy Graham preach the good news of Jesus, this hope and life and forgiveness and grace and an opportunity for a fresh start. And they gravitated to that message. And in the movies, inevitably, people would hear that message and gravitate, and this healing would come and that kind of a thing. And those movies were just stories of what happened in everyday people's lives wherever he went, wherever he preached.
And he's someone who transcended denominations.
Yes.
Because people from all denominations would just go and hear him.
Yeah,
right?
Very true. You could always count, if a Billy Graham event was coming to your city, churches would lay down all of their distinctives and all of their other stuff, and they would come together like no one else could pull that together. Just Billy Graham had this way, his organization, people were just drawn, they wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah, so one man who's been credited with having to influence billions of people around the world what are some of the lessons we cannot be Billy Graham, but what are some of the things that we can take away from him?
A number of lessons that you could take out of Billy Graham's life. Number one is conduct yourself with high integrity, right? Be the person you say you're going to be. Don't pretend, right? Because that always comes out. So, conduct yourself with high integrity. Protect yourself in the sense that, this is very common knowledge. Billy Graham would not go into a hotel room first. He always had one of his staffers always went into the room to make sure that he wasn't being set up in some ways. He was always protected and surrounded himself. I think one of the really remarkable things is about Billy Graham is that at the end of his life, as he and his colleagues began to retire and step away from active ministry, is they all lived in a valley together. And so there's this narrow valley and their houses, all the way along. And so, people like George Beverly Shea and Cliff Sparrow and others, the people who were integral to his life and ministry, they were also his best friends. And there's something to be said about people who have lifelong friends and the lifelong friends that we have who are just with us forever. And that's to me, those friends protected him. Those friends kept him balanced. He provided balance to them and ballast to keep them in times of difficulty, and they for him. And so they really did life together. And I think that's a really, really important part of it. I think the other really important lesson that I would draw out is that keep your message simple, whatever it is, whether it's a ministry lesson, so for him it was the gospel, the good news of Jesus, right? That you can be forgiven.
Yeah, so many people may not have heard that message. What really was his message?
Well, his message was this, is that all of us have fallen short of who God made us to be. That all of us have missed the mark in some way. That was point number one. Point number two, there's nothing that you and I can do about it to fix it. So it's not like I can give more money to the church and then God will be pleased with me, or I'm going to do this or help the poor and then God will be pleased with me. He would say over and over again, there is only one way to find your way to heaven, and that's through the person of Jesus Christ, God's Son.
And come to him as you are. And
come to him as you are. And we would see that, right? In those massive events, they would sing Just As I Am.
Just As I Am.
And, I could get emotional just thinking about those moments, watching thousands of people flock to the front of a stage and there make a decision to follow and to give their life to Christ and to follow him. It's a remarkable legacy.
Remarkable, indeed. And he was a friend to everyone who never had a friend. I mean,
yes.
The people who have seen him or met him, they say that when you were with him, he was really with you.
Yes.
He paid close attention to what you were saying, and he never tried to pretend that I'm a very busy man and a very important man, and you only have a little bit of time.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I just read, with his passing, there's so many tributes and people and memories that they're sharing things. So it's easy to find stuff on the internet right now about him. But someone who was a driver for him and his team at a large event, I think in Portland, Oregon, may have been somewhere else. He talked about driving him home after, like back to the hotel after. Mr. Graham, that was a wonderful message. Billy Graham in the back seat, it's just the gospel. And I really like what you said about this. It's just the gospel. And there was never this sense that he was this deep theologian who is going to tell you something that would need careful explanation. It was the gospel that God loves you, that God cares for you, and that in the midst of your difficulty, in the midst of your sin or your pain or your sorrow, whatever it might be, Jesus is here for you. And that was his resounding message.
Right. So those of you who are just joining us, we are having a candid conversation about Reverend Billy Graham. And we will continue with this conversation next week as well. So stay with us. Don't go anywhere.